Welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast, the week starting Sunday, June 10th. Looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, we see a gale. It's actually a cut-off gale, producing almost 29-foot seas and well to the north, certainly targeting Tahiti, but also the U.S. West Coast, and possibly sideband energy towards Hawaii. So, more swell is in the water. And of course, a little bit of other information. There is already swell starting to hit Southern California from a previous gale in the same area. We'll get into all those details in a minute. As usual, we'll start this week's tour looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales when they form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, and specifically down here in the southern branch of the jet stream. Here's the southern branch, the northern branch is here. The southern branch is the most influential branch and has the best potential to create gales and therefore surf. We're looking for a dip in the trough pushing to the north. That would help create a clockwise flow aloft, and that is the hallmark of low pressure in the southern hemisphere during the summer, and also down at the surface. And of course, a low pressure generates wind, winds generate seas as they radiate away from the fetch area produces swell, and swell when it hits your beach produces surf. Okay, but we do have a trough in the northern branch of the jet. Typically, these are not very strong. Typically, they're what they're called cut off, because most of the energy is down here. You do see a little bit of that energy seeping up, trying to rotate around the apex of the trough, and that helps to create some circulation, but just normally not nearly as strong as what you get down in the lower latitudes here. Just the same, we do have a trough, cut-off trough we'll call it. So let's roll out, see what happens. That trough continues into about Monday and then starts falling apart. Also notice a bit of a trough trying to develop in the central South Pacific on Monday. Let's see if it does anything. No, see, it's cut off too. But again, you get this sort of cut-off trough scenario going on in between the two branches of the jet, but not nearly as much wind pushing north. And that's really what helps to generate circulation. We don't see that in this trough, and it pretty much just peters out. But we do see something that almost tries to resemble a trough developing on Thursday, not pushing very far to the north, not with a lot of wind energy associated with it until Friday. Unfortunately, by Friday, the apex of that trough is at 120 west, so almost out of the Southern California swell window. Certainly looks like it could be productive for South and Central America, though. Anyway, we keep rolling out, though, looking for something. There we go. Looks like actually another trough a week out on Sunday developing just west of New Zealand. Let's see if it goes anywhere. We only have 2 frames there, and it too looks like it wants to cut off. So for whatever reason, the southern branch of the jet stream right now just not very productive. Still, there's some limited hope, but limited is the operative word here. Not a whole lot of activity. We're going to attribute that to the still present but fading La Nina pattern in the upper atmosphere. And until that fades out, which probably won't be till later in the summer, we expect that this sort of cutoff pattern will persist. All right, let's go take a look down at the surface and see what's going on. Maybe, just sometimes, the upper level charts sort of fake us out and don't give a complete picture. So here we are, surface level pressure, surface level winds. Here is, I'll sort of click away from that, our cutoff low. It's got, 40 knot winds right there over on the western flank pushing north. That's what's generating seas. We'll roll this out, and the expectation is, and you can see it, by Monday morning, it's fading out, winds down to 30 knots, dissipating from there. And now we're looking for any other fetch pushing to the north that's 40 knots or greater. See a little patch of 30 knot, little tiny patch of 35 knot winds, not a whole lot going on. Then we get into, remember, there was that other trough developed Thursday, sure enough, there we go, 35, 40, little tiny area, 45 knots, not quite on the edge of the, there we go, now it's on the edge of the Southern California swell window. We'll see how that translates on the wave map model charts, but it certainly looks like it holds potential, at least for maybe very south-angled swell for Southern California, or California, let's say, and certainly more for Chile and Peru. Rolling that out, that fetch continues pretty nicely over in the far southeast Pacific as we get into, now we're a week out. This small little gale developing storm, 55 knot winds over a small area. The ice line's probably right around 65. So the question is this in fact over water, or is it over ice and just be a freezer for penguins, or will it actually do something for us up in the north? We'll have to see when we get to the wave model charts. And then that last little gale we saw developing, and this mainly most of the fetch in the Tasman Sea at 30, 35 knots. Fiji, oh, look at that. Even at 180 hours out, building fetch aimed towards Fiji, but at 180 hours out, don't believe anything. Even at about 150 hours, don't believe it. About 3 to 4 days is about the limit. Let's say 100 hours. After that, things get pretty hard to figure out exactly what's going to happen. But sometimes they do develop, just as the model says. It just takes some luck. All right, the wave model charts. So what is the effect of those winds on the ocean surface? Now, we're actually going back. We didn't look at the upper level charts or anything going back this far. We're at Saturday last week. But the point being, a gale developed, small area 37-foot seas, aimed north. It continued north, 35-foot seas, 36, and then a secondary fetch developed right here, right behind it. So we'll just roll through this on Sunday a week ago. Seas, 38 feet, just barely 40 feet, exactly a week ago, pushing off to the northeast and then fading. So we'll roll through this all real quick again so you can see the whole thing. Whoops, there we go. Okay, there we are. You can see it. Sort of a two-pole swell. The first early bits of that swell are now hitting California, and certainly in Mexico, larger size down there. More size expected for California as we get into the early part of the week. And then on Wednesday, 4 or 5 days ago, another system pushed under New Zealand. Now, 28-foot seas, certainly nothing to get excited about. Built to 30, almost 31 feet on Thursday, and then kind of just faded out. Fell southeast and was gone. Maybe some small, tiny swell relative to California, Hawaii for that, and certainly for Tahiti. Then on Saturday, just yesterday, you can see right underneath here, we'll pull this away, the beginnings of the system, the cutoff low south of Tahiti. What's that, about 25-foot seas, building into Saturday night, 26, 27-foot seas. One more, there we go, Sunday morning, 28-foot seas aimed north. Now, the key on this thing is, because it is so much further north, so for every 10 degrees north you go, it's 600 nautical miles. So typically they're down around 60. This is up around, 35, so 25 degrees difference, so 12 and 3, 1,500 nautical miles closer to the U.S. That means less swell decay and better odds, even though the seas aren't particularly large, because they are closer and they are aimed directly to the north, maybe the odds for swell is a little bit better. So something to be aware of. So there we are today. Current situation. We'll just roll through this. That gale expected to peter out as we get into Monday, and it's gone. We're just kind of going to race through this because there's this one system here on the far southeast Pacific, and we're already out on Friday, tiny little area of 30-foot seas, 31-foot seas, lifting northeast. Yeah, maybe some little swell from that. Nothing huge, but something to ride. Still trying to get organized. Almost a week out now, but still not particularly interesting. Another small area of 38, 39-foot seas, but just over a tiny area, and it is off the ice line here. So, yeah, maybe a little pulse of swell from that as well, if it forms. And then our system in the Tasman Sea with 20, 22, 24, maybe 25-foot seas aimed north. Very close to Fiji. What are we talking about? 1, 2, maybe 1,200 miles off, 1,000 miles off. Certainly swell there, but nothing super large, but certainly large enough to be quite rideable. And then a quick look in the northern hemisphere. So there was a system right over here. It was Hurricane Alita. Winds were up to 125 miles per hour, and it was barely in the Southern California swell window, mainly for Point Doom in that area. I think the swell angle was 154 to 159 degrees. Small pulse of swell, expected to arrive Monday, Tuesday sort of thing. Probably most of it will get lost, or it'll be sort of like background energy compared to the Southern Hemiswell it's supposed to be hitting at the same time. But it'll be a lot more consistent, those smaller and less energetic. So something to be aware of. Also, another tropical system here south of Japan. We'll just roll this out, see where it goes. It's supposed to go north and fade out, and that's what it does. Not even making it to the date line. Doubtful any swell will develop from that. And then another system, I think it's currently a hurricane developing off of Mexico. Maybe just barely. It's mainly the expectation is affecting Cabo San Lucas. Doubtful that much or any energy will get into the Southern California swell window. It needs to be more off here to the west. Something worth watching. Also notice remnants of the tropical system off of Japan, supposed to develop something somehow in the northwestern Gulf on for Thursday and Friday, but notice all this fetch for the most part is aimed off to the north towards Alaska. Probably not a whole lot for the U.S. West Coast, if anything at all. We'll just roll this out and see. Also notice seas off of California. We'll roll this back just so you can see it. That's all wind swell related. We're going to take a look at that in just a second. So plenty of wind swell is the likely outcome locally from the North Pacific. And so here we go. Northeast Pacific, surface level pressure, surface level winds. We're looking for fetch to generate wind swell. Certainly we see it relative to California. Fetch at 25 knot winds. See high pressure there. Heat, low pressure inland produces a gradient, produces north winds. Those north winds generate wind swell. 25 knots, pretty much isolated to Point Conception area. Good for wind swell into Southern California, and there is wind swell even up into Northern California right now. Also notice this high is generating easterly fetch off its southern quadrant aimed at Hawaii. Good for easterly wind swell on exposed east-facing shores. That to continue into Monday. Then the fetch off Hawaii starts fading late Monday. The gradient lifts north a little bit, and you get more fetch aimed into North and Central California. Just it's further north, okay? So that would mean less wind swell for Southern California, more wind swell for North and Central California. Then the gradient, or off the south end of this high here, trend 26 millibar high, again starts to reorganize, pushing easterly fetch into Hawaii. There you go. Nothing huge, but something. And continued wind swell as we get into Friday. You just sort of look at it. So here's that. Remember that the remnant tropical system with all the fetch, they're pretty much aimed to the north. Or off to the, that'd be northeast winds there. So nothing really of interest. So notice 30 knot winds off of Northern California as we get into Thursday, Friday. That's good for significant wind swell down into Southern California and possibly an eddy flow, south winds along the coast, cleaner conditions. Fetch dies for Hawaii as we get into Friday. North wind swell continues up to 35 knot winds off of Cape Mendocino late Friday night into Saturday. More wind swell. Eddy flow continues. That typically means increased temperatures over California as well. And then we get into Sunday and all of it starts fading out. All right, let's take a look long term. What's going on with the MJO and with El Nino, La Nina? Is there a change in the winds? We think so. Let's get into the details. As usual, we like to look at winds across the equatorial Pacific, specifically in the Kelvin wave generation area. So this is the East Pacific here, West Pacific here, that's New Guinea. This is the equator. Kelvin wave generation area, 135 east to 170 west. The date line's right there, so basically just west of the date line. So this is absolute winds, actual 5-day average winds per the TAO buoy array, series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. We see easterly winds blowing pretty solid across the entire East Pacific, but a little bit lighter here over in the West Pacific. We're looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO. So we look at anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. We're looking for arrows to be blowing from the west. We don't see that. It looks like pretty much, yeah, they're coming from the south, but we're looking for east-west components. That tells us whether the MJO is inactive or active. Neutral winds over here, but we don't care so much about here. It's right over in here in the Kelvin wave generation area. It looks like basically a dead neutral pattern, meaning normal winds, meaning neither the active nor the inactive phase of the MJO. If we had westerly winds, westerly anomalies here, that would be the active phase of the MJO. And of course, the active phase helps feed the jet stream. Jet stream helps feed storm development and gives increased probability for surf when you're in that configuration, mainly in the winter months in the Gulf of Alaska, but sometimes in the southern hemisphere it also bumps up swell potential as well. So let's look at the forecast for the next week. We're trying to divine what's going to happen with the MJOs. You can turn active, inactive, what's going on. So in May, so this is the whole planet on one chart. Kelvin date line runs right down the middle of the chart. So the Kelvin wave generation area is between these two tick marks right here. When you see the blues, that means easterly anomalies. So you can see this is classic inactive phase of the MJO signal starting in May 11th, actually before then, and slowly working its way off to the east through about June 5th. It kind of flared up a little again, and here we are today. The last little bits of the inactive phase of the MJO. There you go. There's the date line right there. Over the Kelvin wave generation area, right between those two tick marks, and forecast to fade out. Give it about 2 days, maybe a little lingering couple little area of easterly anomalies into June 14th, and then it's gone. Also notice this strong area of westerly anomalies forecast developing, today and continuing for the next week. Now that's not in the Kelvin wave generation area, so it won't generate a Kelvin wave, but it might help feed what we think is upwelling of an existing Kelvin wave that's starting to erupt right around in this area right now. So easterly anomalies, they tend to amplify upwelling. This might suppress the upwelling, but it might also help raise temperatures at the same time. Continuing on with the MJO thread, looking for signs of the active or the inactive phase. Right now, we're looking at this chart, South America, Australia, New Guinea, Kelvin wave generation area right in there. Absolutely nothing, neither active nor inactive indicated. And for the next 2 weeks, per the statistical model, nothing is forecast. The dynamic model suggests neutral, but then the inactive phase redeveloping about a week out. Interesting. So the two models a little bit confused and not in sync, and they have been that way a lot lately. It's just that the signal from the atmosphere is weak, so both of them are sort of grasping at straws, trying to figure out what's going to happen, and especially we're talking 2 weeks out, so it's always a little bit of a guess. And then phase diagram charts. So this is, again, looking for the active phase of the MJO. This is, assume you're looking down on the north pole of our planet. The MJO, active or inactive, travels west-east from the Indian Ocean to the maritime continent, over the West Pacific, across the date line, through the rest of the eastern Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, across North Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. Where the heavy dot is where the active phase of the MJO is, so we'll say in the far West Pacific. And if it's inside this circle, it's considered to be extremely weak. So the forecast, follow the green line here, is for it to build a little bit the next day or two, but still remain very, very weak, and eventually just sort of meander off back to the Indian Ocean for the next 2 weeks. That per the ECMF model. The GEFS model, some variant of the same thing, but basically both saying no significant indication of the active phase of the MJO anywhere in our area, meaning no support for the jet stream and probably not a whole lot of help for storm development. The upper level model, so this shows the propensity for precipitation, and one can assume that's also tied to the MJO. So there's South America, greens mean favorable for precipitation over the equator, so that probably means the active phase, or whatever there is of the MJO, bleeding out east and away, moving into the Atlantic. Inactive phase developing and basically slowly plotting across the Pacific for the next 40 days, and a even weaker active phase of the MJO not developing till July 15th in the far West Pacific. So basically from now, a month of no real support for storm development with the inactive phase, whatever this is, in control. We still have some more models to look at. So the CFS model going out just a month. Here is today's date. There is the dotted contours, the inactive phase of the MJO, pretty much gone. The forecast right now suggests westerly anomalies. Oh, Kelvin wave generation area between these two tick marks going up, and we're looking down the chart. Westerly anomalies, the oranges and yellows, but pretty much outside of the Kelvin wave generation area. Another resurgence of easterly anomalies around June 23rd or so, but not lasting long, and then fading out. And westerly anomalies consistent on the date line, but we'd like them a little bit further back, maybe more 150 to 180, but we'll take whatever we can get. At least there's not a strong easterly anomaly pattern like there, suggested in the Kelvin wave generation area. Just kind of a dead neutral pattern indicated. And then finally, the 3-month version of the CFS model, 850 millibar winds. That's winds up about 4,200 feet. Those are a pretty good proxy for what's going on down at the surface. So Kelvin wave generation area between these two tick marks, but basically go up here between here and here. And per this model, and the forecast goes upward. You can see it. So this suggests the yellows are westerly anomalies. Here we are right now, basically dead neutral. This suggests, looks like, the active phase of the MJO developing, westerly anomalies in the Kelvin wave generation area into July 4th, and then building far stronger after that and totally in control. Let's overlay the MJO. And here you go. Supposedly, we're in some sort of an active phase of the MJO. Very weak. It's supposed to hold into about, the latter part of June 20th or so. A weak inactive phase to follow, but still westerly anomalies in the Kelvin wave generation area. Then a far stronger active phase of the MJO developing. Now, the interesting part is you watch this model day by day by day, and it flops around a lot, though it's been consistently saying strong westerly anomalies as we get into the July-August time frame, and some stronger version of the active phase of the MJO. But in this time frame, from now till, well, let's say mid-July or so, it's been anywhere from no MJO signal to weak MJO signal. This is actually the strongest it looks, so we're going to kind of disregard it and say a very weak MJO signal, but with westerly anomalies. No strong. These easterly anomalies here are east of 130 or west of 135 east, so outside of the Kelvin wave generation area. So more or less a very favorable pattern. We just need some MJO activity to kind of push things along, and I think the issue is La Nina is still in the atmosphere. It's still trying to fade. It tends to suppress the active phase of the MJO. It's on its last legs. There's something going on tropical, and we're going to get into that in just a second. And, oh yes, the low-pass filter, of course. Here we go. So this sort of explains it. Low-pass filter, this solid contour over the Kelvin wave generation area suggests, at least atmospherically, there's a bias towards low pressure in this area, which means the perhaps development of La Nina, or at least a neutral pattern. If this dotted pattern were over here, that would say La Nina, El Nino, developing the solid contour, low pressure bias, and building as we get into late July and August. So all this suggests is La Nina is dying. It just takes a long time to, it's a big boat, takes a long time to turn, the atmosphere that is, and so we're just waiting for that to happen. The thought is late July into early August, the atmosphere should have turned, and then things start lining up. The MJO wakes up, westerly anomalies wake up, and then maybe, just maybe, something more interesting starts to occur. So we got to suffer basically through about another month and a half or so. So what's going on in the ocean, temperature-wise? Enough of the MJO, enough of that. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Temperature data from the TAO buoy array. These are the sensors on the anchor lines of the TAO buoy. And you can see warm water in the west. This 28-degree isotherm, quite steady now for the past 2 weeks at about 160 west. It was a whole way over at 180 west about a month ago. It has made significant eastward progress, suggesting that trades are dying, warm water or something's going on, and likewise, these temperatures are building in depth off to the east as well. Let's look at anomalies, differences from normal this time of year. We see our Kelvin wave, been monitoring this. A large Kelvin wave generated by a large westerly wind burst back in February is pushing the east 3-degree temperatures above normals down about 50 meters or so, pushing to the east, also starting to push 1.5 degree anomalies to the surface over from about, 125 west, that'd be like south of California, into Ecuador. Keep that in mind. We'll take a look, examine that a little bit more in a second. And then a different modeled view of that, a little bit higher resolution, suggests 1, 2, 3, 4. These patches, 1, 2, 3, 4. 3.5 degree anomalies in pockets up to 4 degrees in the East Pacific, and a broader area of 1 to 2 degree anomalies. This is a large Kelvin wave pushing to the west, generated by westerly winds in the Kelvin wave generation area, generated by a strong push of the active phase of the MJO. So that's why we monitor the West Pacific in the Kelvin wave generation area for the active phase of the MJO for long and prolonged periods of westerly winds, because that pushes warm water at depth to the east, and then that helps sometimes kick off El Nino. Now, we're not saying that's going to happen, but we're at this point, we're just looking for the complete demise of La Nina and a return to a normal situation. That clearly looks like it's getting ready to happen, if not something more. Also notice warm temperatures here, half to 1 degree above normal. Right there's a pocket of 1 degree above normal, another there. So this is between 135 and about 100 west. So we'll go look at the surface and see if warm water is actually starting to erupt there. If it does, that would suggest this Kelvin wave, the very first parts of it, is starting to erupt on the surface, and that would certainly be the end of La Nina. Upper ocean heat anomalies, basically telling us the same picture. Back August last year, this is the East Pacific here, West Pacific here, time going down to the present in the bottom. Here was our La Nina, cool water, the blues, below normal temperatures. You can read the scale there. In the East Pacific, La Nina, a weak little Kelvin wave pushed across in December, January timeframe. Didn't even hardly make it across the Pacific. Upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave cycle gets cool for a little bit. Then here was our big Kelvin wave that developed in February from the active phase of the MJO. It made it to about 120 west and stalled, and now it's sort of woken up and pushed again, and we think it's pushing off to the east. We see a little bit of warmer, what's that, a half to 1 degree above normal, pushing into Ecuador at this point in time, according to this chart. This is anywhere from the upper 300 meters of the ocean, so from the surface down 300 meters. And sea level anomalies basically telling us the same thing. There's the equator, South America there, Australia there. This from the JASON 2, JASON 3 satellites, strip out all the winds, strip out the waves, strip out the tides. We're looking for a bump on the ocean surface. That would suggest warm water at depth. Warm water, of course, expands a little bit. That would create a little lump, 5 centimeter, maybe 10 centimeter bump on the ocean surface. And what you see is a huge area of warm water at depth, going from north of New Guinea the whole way into Ecuador, continuously now. Used to be broken a little bit here. Even yesterday it was broken a little bit. Now it's continuous, suggesting our Kelvin wave is on the verge of erupting. And yes, so finally we get to the sea surface temperature anomaly charts. Differences in normal for this time of year for temperatures on the surface. Along Peru, yes, some upwelling, some blues. Trades nuking pretty good out of the south here. That creates upwelling, but that's not so much important. Here's the Galapagos. You see what's going on east of the Galapagos from, what is that, about 90 west out to 140 west. Warmer than normal temperatures showing up. And the official Nino monitoring region, El Nino monitoring region, is from 120 west, 5 degrees north and south. So from there down to there, down to there. And what do we have? Well, we know we have trades blowing here. We know we have warm water erupting here. We already have warm water erupting in the Nino 3.4 region, and whatever warm water erupts here is going to get carried by the trades into here. And that right here is the last little bit of La Nina fading out, not even hardly in the in the Nino 3.4 region anymore. We also had not quite as much warming. There was a lot of warming off of Mexico and that area. That's sort of upwelled a little bit. There's some tropical activity going on down here. That sometimes puts a damper on warming, but still quite warm off of Mexico, south of California. There's Hawaii. This whole basin, very warm indeed. 7-day trend, yeah, a little bit of cooling here off of Ecuador. Also notice the cooling off of Africa here. We'll slide that over just a little bit. Sometimes when you get this building cooling off of Africa, it also shows up in this region too, perhaps driven by the inactive phase of the MJO that's moving, one would think, over here, but hard to say. Warming, yeah, a little bit of warming off in the region that we saw the Kelvin wave erupting from here out to about here, but not super strong, not super significant. So nothing really stands out there. But the broad view picture, here we go. Peru, there's our little bit of upwelling there. Here is the Nino 3.4 region here out to here. And you see warming, still a little bit like lingering bits of La Nina hanging on, and that's affecting the jet stream still a little bit. And even when it disappears and we have warm water filling the area here, still it's going to take a couple of months for the jet stream to reconfigure itself. So we're thinking probably not until, late July at the earliest, probably mid-August sort of time frame when things really start, the jet stream starts reorganizing. Yeah, so maybe we'll get a late pulse of activity under New Zealand sort of thing, but really that sets us up more for the fall in the Gulf of Alaska and North Dateline region as we get there. Quick look at sea surface temperatures in the Niño 1.2 region. This is the area just off of Peru. Temperatures still half a degree to 1 degree below normal. Dropped off a half a degree just lately, minus 0.932. But, you know, this is kind of noisy. Still, we'd like to see it warmer. But in the Niño 3.4 region, the official El Niño monitoring region, you can see the trend since March, steadily upward, and we're bordering on normal. Today's temperature, minus not even a tenth of a degree, half of a tenth of a degree, 52 hundredths of a degree below normal. So we're almost at normal in the Niño 3.4 region. If that can hold for a week or two, then we'll say we're normal. And then at that point in time, that's when the jet should start waking up or doing something different than being in a La Niña pattern. So what does the atmosphere think is going on? Well, we look at the Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Tahiti and Darwin. If it's negative, that suggests that maybe the active phase of the MJO is going on, at least on the daily contribution. Right now, it's minus 3.45, but yesterday it was plus 2.95, so it's just kind of been bouncing around, suggesting neither La Niña or El Niño. The 30-day average gives you a better sense. It rounds out the noise, tells you what's going on. Today, it's at plus 2.68 and has been hanging somewhere in that vicinity, suggesting again maybe at best a very, very weak inactive phase of the MJO. And the 90-day average strips out all the noise. You can sort of tell El Niño, La Niña from that, plus 3.71 and dropping, suggesting a fading La Niña. And the ESPI index, basically similar to the Southern Oscillation Index, but instead of measuring the difference in pressure between these two areas, it's the difference in precipitation. A negative number means less precipitation in here, which typically means cooler water. Cooler water has less evaporation, so therefore you get less precipitation above it. Today's index, minus 0.81. Now it was inching up to minus 0.3 couple of weeks ago, and then all of a sudden it dropped off down to like minus 1, and now it's digging its way back out of that again. But we expect that this should move pretty close to 0 in the next month or so. It's sort of all dependent on what the Kelvin wave eruption pattern does and what sea surface temperatures do right in this area. Then finally, the official sea surface temperature forecast for the Niño 3.4 region. Well, let's see, April, May, June would be somewhere here. So about mid-June, it says we're supposed to be neutral. We looked at the sea surface temperatures. The Niño 3.4 region were, basically dead neutral. The forecast from here says temperatures rising, and this is probably the most conservative of all the models. Half a degree above normal by July. That's only 3 weeks out or so. Pushing to all 9/10 of a degree above normal by October, and then hanging about 1 to 1.1 degrees above normal starting in the November-ish time frame the whole way through. It looks like winter, suggesting potentially a weak El Niño. We're kind of actually wishing that wouldn't happen. We wish the ocean would recharge a little bit more, but we'll take what we can get. Either way, that certainly is favorable for the late summer, fall, and winter time frame, both in terms of precipitation for California and for swell potential generation. We'll see what really plays out. But again, all the other models are suggesting some variant on the same thing. Last time we looked, the average temperature was supposed to be 0.8 of a degree above normal, and I think it's somewhere about another week or so, the consensus average, the mid-July average will pop out, and then we'll take a look and see where we're at. But it sort of looks like there's a stronger consensus now that we're moving. So the spring unpredictability barrier ends about June 1st or so. So typically the models get a firmer handle on what's going on, and if this consensus builds somewhere around here, then we could be in pretty good shape come the fall. So for right now, southern hemiswell hitting California and Mexico and everywhere in between. Nothing huge, but certainly rideable and steady, maybe to build a little bit in the early part of the week. And then it fades. Another pulse from the cutoff low south of Tahiti might generate some more swell beyond that. And then probably a weaker pattern to follow. Tropical activity heating up kind of early in the year for the North Pacific, and we'll see how that goes. The more this El Nino-like pattern builds, the warmer temperatures we'll get in the tropics, and the better the odds for tropical development. That also says the better the odds in the West Pacific as we get into the late fall for recurving storms, making it over the North Dateline region and building, but we're way ahead of ourselves early. Let's get through the summer first. Anyway, that's it for this week. We'll do it again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.